What was the scariest moment you've had on vacation? Part 2. Me and my mother were having coffee in a market in Nicaragua in 2013, minding our own business, sitting right by the road, when suddenly, a motorbike pulled up at the intersection, where a group guys were just chatting. Motorbike guys pulled out a semi-auto looking gun, and shot all four, before pulling off. Our honeymoon. Flying into Toronto Airport, coming into land, to make a connecting flight overseas. We hear grinding under the plane. This repeats a couple of times, and then the pilot, calm as can be, clicks on the intercom, and says, "We seem to be having a little trouble with the landing gear. Everyone please take your seats and buckle your seatbelts. We're going to delay our approach, please bear with us." One of the stewardesses rushes towards the cockpit. The seatbelt light goes on, and I look at my husband, who hates to fly. He just gives me a look of pure dread and terror, not saying a word. And I know that this trip was my idea, and this is all my fault. More grinding, and the plane tilts as we start to circle. The pilot gets back on the intercom and says, "All flight attendants to their seats, please." More grinding. Then the pilot again, "Everyone, we have the landing gear down and engaged, we will be landing shortly. Thank you for your patience." The whole plane cheered when we landed. My first year abroad in China, 2002, 19F, at the time. I'm in the northeast in the dead of winter, not too far from Siberia. I didn't speak a word of Mandarin then. Myself, and some other foreign kids, decided to take a 3-hour night train to a nearby city, to check it out, one weekend. The trains at that time were like cattle cars, people packed in wall to wall, lots of loud yelling. There was no sign that indicated when you reached your stop. Instead, a train employee would come into the car, and scream the name of the next stop over the noise. Well, none of us heard it when the name of our stop was called. We only realized we might have missed our destination when we realized we'd been on the train for an hour longer than the trip was supposed to take. We approached the train staff member, and tried to explain ourselves with hand gestures, repeating the name of the place we were going over and over. He points back the way we came, indicating we were indeed supposed to get off the train earlier. Then he gestures at us to wait, and when we reach the next stop, he calls over some other guy, we have no idea who this guy is, and motions for us to go with him. The guy leads us off the train, and we emerge into an empty, silent, snowy train yard. The guy starts walking up and down the trains, we presume trying to find the one that is going back the way we came, and we're all trudging along behind him. All of a sudden, the door of a building, near the train station, bursts open, and 2 military uniformed guards bolt out, run over to us screaming, grab our guy and hit him in the mouth. He's cowering and apologizing and talking a mile a minute. We have no idea what's going on, but this seems very bad. It dawns on us that absolutely no one has any idea where we are. We don't even know where we are. There are no cell phones. If we disappeared, or something happened out there, no one would ever find us. Our parents, and our school, would look for us in the city we were supposed to be in, not way out in the middle of nowhere. The guards take us into a full-on interrogation room. One bare light bulb hangs on a string from the ceiling, cement walls, barred windows, metal desk. They start yelling at us, we don't know what they're saying. They start yelling at this guy, he's obviously scared, and trying to explain something. This goes on for an hour. They point at us and yell, they point at him and yell, they bang the desk. They make us dump out our bags, go through our stuff. We think we're about to get tossed in a gulag, never to be heard from again. Because maybe they think we're spies? Turns out, they just thought we were sneaking around in the train yard, because we were trying to dodge paying the return train fare, which was a whopping 8 Chinese yuan, which is around $1. I stayed in China for many years after that, and rode many trains, and understood later that we were supposed to go into the train station, buy another ticket, and go back through the check-in. In retrospect, duh, but we were just dumb kids, following some random guy around. Wasn't his fault either. My guess is that the train employee probably told him to just find us a return train. And I understand why the guards were so mad. That was a restricted non-passenger area, and we weren't supposed to be out there, though a punch in the mouth was overkill. Still, all of that over $1. We couldn't get our wallets out fast enough. As soon as we paid, they immediately chilled out. They didn't even try to extort any more cash out of us, except the cost of the train fare, which often happened back then. Then they helped put us back on the right train with a smile. My family took a Christmas vacation to Honduras. It was 1994, and my sister was serving in the Peace Corps at the time. New Year's Eve, our last night there, we went out to eat in San Pedro Sula. No more than 10 minutes after we sat down, our restaurant was held up by 3 gunmen. We were ordered to get under the table and place cash and valuables on top. They took cash, booze, and knocked the phone off the wall before departing. I was 11. Not for me, but my dad. Years ago, when I was still a toddler, we were at the beach, and I wanted to go into the water so badly, but I wasn't allowed. However, my dad thought that I should learn a lesson, so he let me go in. I sprint into the water, and immediately get bodied by a rogue wave. My dad freaked out, and ran in to try and find me, but I wasn't anywhere to be seen, until he looks down through the foam, and sees my face, eyes wide open, grinning ear to ear, submerged under the water, as I get dragged back out to sea. I guess, we both learned a lesson that day. I learned not to underestimate Mother Nature, and he learned that I'm clinically insane. Rented a Wrangler through Turo, think Airbnb for cars, for our honeymoon in Hawaii. Dude picked us up in the Jeep at the airport, when our flight landed at 11 p.m., and didn't have his own ride back, so asked to drive us to a shop, where we could drop him off. I'm a pretty big dude, and we're a pair of, 2, trusting Okies, so we went along with it thinking, he seemed fine, he was on Turo and we were still in America, so, no worries, right? Pretty typical drive. Dude was a super nice mid-40s Argentinian, that visited when he was younger, and never wanted to go home. All felt fine, until he turned off the highway down a dark road, and then pulled onto an even darker road, and through a gated chain-linked fence into a completely unlit industrial park, and stopped the car. Wife had already been panic texting me, Troker61, what the F is this? Get us out of here. I looked at him, and said, you good? And he could not have been nicer, or more oblivious to our anxiety. Yes. Thank you both so much, and have a great trip, see you next week. My wife, probably wisely, wouldn't even get out of the back seat, she's like 5'1" inch, so, let him ride shotgun, until we were a mile away. I'm older and wise enough to avoid situations that out of my control, nowadays, but man, are we lucky, that hippie Argentinian just needed a ride home. He left a mixed CD in the Wrangler, we listened and laughed along with, all week. I'll never forget track 2, California Girls, by Katy Perry. Hope he's doing well. When I was 21, my friend and I backpacked through Belize. Started a conversation with a local, who eventually told us, he was part of the Crips, and proceeded to show me all of his abdominal stab wound scars. He told us, his gang likes to kill people for fun, and then asked us, if we wanted to go with him on a boat ride. I had to act like I was considering it for a second, before I turned him down. Didn't want to make him too mad. I spent several weeks touring India, with my mom and stepdad. I had so many men and boys approach my mom, and ask, if they could marry me. They were dead serious. Mom, jokingly, agreed to many. At one point, I had to go have a tour of the house of this guy, that sold chai and heroin to the tourists and locals. I had to go through a 2 hours awkward encounter with this Indian dude, that liked to rub my feet, and looked like a tan version of the little creepy thing off The Lord of the Rings. I met his 2 wives and his mom. They made me and my dad some naan, and it was up to my dad's approval, if I could stay. Thankfully, my stepdad loved the shit out of me, and knew Indian culture well, so, I wasn't sold off for an 8-ball. But at 15, it was scary AF, thinking I'd never return home, cause my mom was dumb. I was 13, on vacation overseas, with my mom. We woke up at 5 a.m., due to jet lag, and the morning was beautiful, so, we decided to go for a swim. We are used to a very calm sea, technically, a bay, so, we didn't think it was a big deal to swim when there are no lifeguards. As a result, we got caught in a rip current, without knowing what it was. My mom was a very weak swimmer, so, she told me to swim to the shore and call for help. But the shore was empty, so, I knew she just wanted me to leave her, and save myself. So, I grabbed her by the hand, and swam as hard as I could. Luckily, we were close to the shore, and my desperate sprint got us to the place where we could stand. We went back, and felt insanely sleepy, so, we went to sleep, and woke up 10 hours later. When we looked out of the hotel window, we noticed the red flags on the beach, and no one was swimming. Was visiting my extended family, out in eastern Ohio, in the middle of winter, and I had asked my aunt and mom if I could go sledding in my aunt's backyard. She lived in the rolling hills part of the Appalachian area, and she said yes. Earlier in the year, the DNR was supposed to have removed a barbed wire fence that was at the bottom of the hill, as it was interfering with the migration of deer, but it wasn't. I slid right through the simpage, and it sliced and hacked my face, shredding my chin and lower lip. There was so much blood that I had to hold a large coffee mug under my chin to catch the blood, because rags and towels were pointless. My physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional pain that my mom was suffering, though. Turns out, we were there because my dad walked out on my mom and his kids, so my mom went back to her hometown for support, and my 6-year-old dumb self just added to her stress. As a 40-plus-year-old, I feel like shit for it. This was probably 2006? Maybe 2007. So, I was like 15 or 16. I went out surfing by myself, in a swell, along the Jersey Shore, early in the morning, right before a hurricane was about to hit. I was riding a retro single fin from the 70s, and it was choppy as F in the water. I really shouldn't have been out there, especially since there was no one else out there. I dropped in and hit some trop. My board doesn't have much of a nose, so it went right into the water. It caused me to be appended, and I got hit at the base of my skull with a fin. I, thankfully, didn't get knocked out, and resurfaced and started to paddle back in, but couldn't control the board because the fin broke off on the back of my head. It took me a bit to get back in. I am thankful I was a swimmer and had the stamina to make it back to shore, because it was one of the most difficult situations I'd been in the water. That could have ended very badly. I definitely got lucky. Buenos Aires, this year, in April, in the Palermo district. I was beaten up by a group of men, and my knee was broken, and my head was smashed. Long story, but I think I ran into a street gang, and part of the gang even walked me back to my hostel, keeping in mind, street gangs are mostly older teenage or young 20s guys, and I think what happened went too far for a few of them, or something, otherwise I would be worse off, and possibly dead. I have PTSD from that night. I was 7, and on my first family vacation to Disney World. In the Orlando airport, we were waiting for the tram to take us to the other side of the airport, I'm assuming from our arrival gate to baggage claim, but I'm not sure, because I was 7. A tram came, and my mom said, "Let's get on this one," so I remember literally hopping on. The doors closed behind me, and my family wasn't on the tram. I began sobbing uncontrollably, and this woman pulled me close to her family. She held me close on the tram, and at the next station, until my family arrived on the next tram. I never got her name, but if she reads this by chance, please DM me, so I can thank you. 30 years later. Was backpacking on Catalina Island, with a girls group. Set up camp for the night, then huddled in a tent, while a herd of buffalo stampeded right to our spot, ran around the tent, then settled for the night. Just about pooped my pants. Apparently, the males are kind of aggressive, as they are on birth control, for population control on the island. Poor horny souls. In Vegas, during the shooting, walking down towards Mandalay Bay, after a Knights vs Kings preseason game. My wife got a sudden sick feeling, not like a cold or stomach issues, just very uneasy. We crossed over just after Tropicana, and started making our way back to our hotel, further up the strip. Went to bed, after hearing about a shooting, but didn't know, until we woke up, about the carnage we would have certainly walked through. Pretty certain, her grandfather, who passed just months before this trip, was telling her from above to not continue on the path we were going. Still get chills about what may have been, and feel so terrible about the innocent lives lost that night. My in-laws' family overloaded a golf cart shuttle, and as it was climbing a hill, it tipped, falling 10 or so feet down the embankment. My father-in-law was underneath it with his mother and 2 other people, including the 19 to 20 years old driver still in the cart. If it weren't for him holding it up, his 70-year-old mother would have been crushed as well, and the cart would have continued falling into the lake 20 to 30 some feet below. He had some nasty bruises, but everyone was okay overall. I was taking the train in Milan, with my girlfriend at the time, and this man sat in front of us, and locked eyes with me. He took a photo of me, and after a few moments on the phone, he hung up, and he took out a knife, and began gesturing to slit his throat, all while maintaining eye contact with me. He then began yelling in Italian, and slammed the blade of his knife into the chair and the window behind him, as he got increasingly angry at us, for who knows what. We got up, and sat at the end of the train. The guy stayed where he was, but maintained eye contact. We got off at the next stop, but in the moment, I thought I was being mistaken for a person that had a hit on their head. Bought hash off of some Pakistani dudes in India, and they brought us into a back room of a rug store, and a gnarly looking dude with Bond villain scars and a hook hand started pressing us on our politics. Very tense. They clearly had some agenda, but they eased up and let us go when we said F Bush, and they found out we weren't American, but I wonder how it might have gone otherwise. March 12, 2020, Marriott in Bogota by the airport. We're flying back home to the States the next day, and my wife comes down with food poisoning. I'm watching Mayhem at O'Hare on CNN, and the staff is terrified to hand me room service food at the door. Thoughts running through my mind include missed flights and closed borders. We made it on the flight fine. They were just waving everyone through customs at the Atlanta airport, and Colombia shut down international flights like 12 hours after we left, if I remember correctly. TLDR, my 6-year-old nephew disappeared for 30 seconds at an interstate rest area. Stopped at an interstate rest area. Myself and my 6-year-old nephew went in the men's room. Long story short, he finished before me and ran out of the restroom. I shouted for him to stop, as I stopped midstream and chased after him. I got out the door, and it took me about 30 seconds to spot him at a bench 10 feet in front of the building, but that may have been the longest and most horrifying 30 seconds of my life. My diabetic pump died. We didn't have long-lasting insulin, so my mom and I, 13M, were forced, after trying all other measures, to go to the hospital at 1:30 a.m. in Mexico. We got a cab to bring us to an emergency room, and after being discharged, they sent us to a pharmacy at 3 a.m. to get needles and meds. We didn't speak the language, we didn't know where we were, didn't know where a pharmacy was, etc. Our cab driver was dope. He kept me distracted, while my mom went to get my meds, and even got out and let a few drunk men know to stop accosting my mom. Overall, it was a great trip, but it got hairy there for a while. I was with my family in Jamaica when I was 16. I was swimming in the ocean with my younger brother when a local man literally grabbed me and started swimming me out to sea towards a boat with other men on it. He kept saying I was going to be his American girl. He got pretty far out before my brother was able to get help from other adults. It was terrifying. I was about 4 or 5, camping party for my birthday over in Moab. Whole group probably had about 20 or so people, including a couple dogs. We were about an hour or so through a hike, and we came across a drop with a ladder going down about 20 or so feet to continue the hike. My dad sat me down on the edge of the cliff, and he was going to start heading down the ladder, and grab me as he was traveling down. That didn't go as planned, and my friend's dog slammed into me, and I slid off headfirst and began to plummet down. Thankfully, my dad had the reaction time to catch me by my ankles. If his reaction time would have been a millisecond late, I would not be here now. My mom was at the back of the hiking group, but once she figured out what happened to me, she lost her shit on my dad. Funny thing, my dad wasn't even going to tell her, another person in our group had to tell her, that I almost fell to my death. My mother refuses to ever go on that hike again. Edit, one ankle. He caught me by one ankle. I had been on tour with a band for a month. I flew from the UK to Qatar to Dubai for the Dubai International Jazz Festival. We were staying in the host hotel for the jazz festival, which is normal. The hotel was full of men in the traditional dress of the area, which, considering that it was an international jazz festival, I found a little odd. As the band manager, I was on site for a week before the festival even opened, as we were doing rehearsals for a solid week before the festival. I never saw anyone in national dress at the festival site. We did the festival, checked out of the hotel, and in the lobby, I noticed a newspaper that had multiple faces of men and one woman plastered across it. However, it was in Arabic, and I couldn't read it. One of the women oddly resembled me. We got to the airport, and I went to the newsstand to get a newspaper. As I was reading it, I realized that a high-level operative from a group that would be anti-certain other countries had been assassinated in our hotel the day we got there. The reason that there were 70 men in national dress was because they were basically the FBI of the country. Think of it like the head of the CIA was assassinated in the United States. It would cause a furor. I don't want to get more specific, because it's possible to identify me. To confirm my suspicions, that I wasn't dreaming, they literally had a photo of our hotel room in the newspaper, and a photograph of one of the women with the men that they said were the other terrorists in the elevator. So, I knew it was our hotel. And it was scary. I was just reading this paper at the airport, but I was suddenly called up to the front, as we were in the boarding area, and there are these very large men inspecting my passport. All of a sudden, there were multiple men running down the gangway to the area where we were waiting to the plane, and they were all in military dress, and they had machine guns. They grabbed me, and a tiny woman in a hijab and abaya job told me that I needed to come with her immediately. I didn't argue. Neither did the guys in the band, as I had told them don't mess with security in Dubai. LOL. They took me into a small room, and the woman in the hijab shooed the men out. The translator, she started asking me questions. How long have I been in the UK? What were my political affiliations? What was I doing in Dubai? What was my religion? Did I have any animosity towards Muslims? So many questions. I answered them all. I was honest. She finally shook her head, knocked on the door, and they let me go. Evidently, I remarkably resembled one of the women, who had assassinated their political figure. And I had spent the same amount of time in the UK as she had, as she was trying to cover her tracks, as she has traveled from Ireland, to kill this man. I found this out via some of the people involved in the music festival, because my detention almost caused an international incident. So, I always read newspapers, when I travel internationally, now, and find someone to translate for me, if I think there's something weird going on. This didn't happen to me, but to a friend of mine. I wasn't there, but this is the story I heard later. He goes on vacation. Has a great time with his wife, brother, friends. They party, have drinks, and head to the pool. One friend dives in. My friend follows. The first guy comes up just fine. My friend doesn't. He must have broken his neck diving in. He was barely 30 years old. His mom had to fly down to collect his body. He donated his organs. It was such a shock. He was always making people laugh, he knew everyone. He was always willing to help out with a favor, and just loved talking to people. It shouldn't have happened to him. Montana, Glacier National Park. My husband wanted to climb down to get a closer look at a steep, rushing gorge. I mean, this wasn't just a stream, this was immense amounts of powerful crashing water that would have taken him away in a second. I warned him not to go down there, but he insisted. I watched him, while holding my breath, and sure enough, his foot slipped, and he almost went down. I seriously thought for a moment, I was about to lose my husband. Thankfully, he caught himself, but then looked up with the eyes that said, "Oh shit, you were right." I arrived at the airport, in my long-distance girlfriend's country. I was traveling alone, and she was coming to pick me up. As I was leaving the airport, people were aggressively trying to offer me rides, cabs, Uber, unlicensed, etc., which I obviously declined. Then one guy called out to me by name, and said he was sent to pick me up. I called my girlfriend to ask about it. She freaked out, and told me to immediately go back inside the airport until she arrived to get me. So, I guess, I almost got kidnapped or something? I have no logical explanation as to how they knew my name. Last day of my friends and I's San Diego trip, we called an Uber for brunch, and a car pulls up that doesn't match the app description at all. Wrong model, wrong license plate. The driver yells out my name, acting super casual, like, "It's your Uber, come on in." My phone rings, and it's the actual Uber driver I requested, and he's confused why I haven't gotten in the car yet. I tell him I don't see his car, and he says, "Uber hasn't updated my car model or license plate yet," but the person in the car clearly isn't even on the phone. He looking straight at me. I tell the person on the phone I'm canceling, and next thing I know, the driver in the car is yelling at me through the window to get in. He even gets out of the car at this point. My friend and I run back into the hotel lobby. We explain the situation to the front desk, and thankfully, the staff jumped into action. We also reported it to Uber. I am grateful we were close enough to the hotel to run away. If we weren't, I don't know what would have happened.